All right, well, welcome to the Utah State Board of Education online version of Portrait of the Graduate workshops. We thank you for taking your time to join us today. We have just a few of you who've joined the session at this time. We'd like to take a moment to allow you to introduce yourself. You'll notice in the WebEx you can do that through the chat box on the right-hand side of the screen down at the bottom. That chat box we've also placed in there the URL to a Padlet that we'll be using to gather your feedback as participants as we get going into this sessions. So let's go ahead and take a minute to introduce yourself either through audio or through online, depending on what you're most comfortable with.
Should we go ahead and start with William, if you would like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello, my name is William Evans, and I'm an intern at EdDirection.
Thanks, William.
Yeah, it's nice to have you with us, William.
Thank you, it's great to be here.
And Athena?
Hi, sorry, forgot to unmute my microphone. This is Athena. I'm also with EdDirection.
Great, thank you.
Glad you're on the line. And then we have another call-in, user 3. All right, we'll go on. I'm Patty Norman, Deputy Superintendent of Student Achievement, and I appreciate your time in participating in the Portrait of a Utah Graduate. And then here's Darren Nelson, who will be facilitating this discussion.
Yeah, and I'm happy to be doing this. We've been conducting these focus groups for the last almost a month now, I think, Patty. And we've been in various places across the state, and we've had lots of different groups that we've been in front of and gathered that information. And as we talk about this today, we'll give you more of a timeline towards the end of what we're going to do with that input data that we've received. But I want to start by I'm going to try to share my screen here, and we'll use the PowerPoint slides that we've been using across the state to kind of guide our discussion. And then, again, we'll come back, and it won't be too much longer, and we will be using this Padlet to collect your input. Whoops. I need to go back to the beginning here. So, if you are a social media user, and whether it's Twitter, or Facebook, Instagram, we do have a hashtag, and if you follow this, you'll see photographic images from our various stakeholder groups and also other comments that people have been giving. You also can use this to keep track of what's going on as we continue to move forward as the State Board of Education in progress here. So, clarity of purpose. As we meet with groups, it's important for us to understand that what we're not talking about are graduation credits or course-taking patterns. In education, when we start talking about graduation, we have a predisposition, I'd say, to where we commonly default to that. Oh, are we talking about how many credits a student needs to take and which classes are required, which ones are elective? The purpose of our work in identifying the Utah Portrait of a Graduate is broader than that. And so I want you just to put that in context as we talk today and as we seek input from each of you. That we're not talking about graduation credit, but we're talking about a vision of what would the ideal graduate, when they leave the schools, the doors of their high school, what do they possess? What do they look like? So the Utah State Board of Education has been working for some time on clarifying the vision and mission of the board. They put some significant work together in July in this area, and then at their most recent board meeting. And so this slide depicts their vision and also their mission that the employees, those of us who work for them, follow. There's also work being done right now to identify the strategies that are aligned to the goals, which come underneath that mission as well. So that work's going on concurrently to this work of a Portrait of a Graduate. I think it's important, and we've bolded the language about prepare to succeed and lead. The board, as they had their most recent discussion about that, they emphasized that language and the importance of that, and setting our vision of what we want our kids to be able to do as they leave our schools. And so, again, what we're really trying to look at is what are our hopes and dreams and aspirations for our students. And we're going to challenge your thinking a little bit by giving you some questions. And we'll go through 4 rounds. And it'll look a little different in an online setting or delivery platform than it does face-to-face where we have breakout groups. But essentially, we'll do the same process, but trying to do it through technology. We'll have 4 questions on this Padlet that I'm going to put up here in a minute. And we'll ask each of you to think about those questions, and then we'll time you, and we'll collect, we'll probably go 1.5 to 2 minutes per question, depending on the input that's coming in, and allow you to enter responses to these 4 questions. In the end of this, after we get through that, we'll ask each of you as participants to give us some input on what do you believe is the most important attribute of a Utah graduate. So then what we'll do with that as state board employees is we have hundreds of, probably over 1,000 now, but we're certainly hundreds of data points that have come in from different participants of these focus groups. And then our job will be to synthesize all of that information down into a format that can inform the board as they work to identify, publish, and then use the portrait of a graduate to make decisions within our scope of work and responsibilities to help move the education system forward in the state of Utah. So I'm going to try to exit out of this, and we'll get into the Padlet. And again, the Padlet URL for that Padlet is listed down in the text feature of the WebEx. You can copy and paste that into a browser. And I think what we're going to start with, the room thinks there's nobody in here because we've been sitting still for so long. Okay, thank you, Patty. That might happen again during this meeting if we sit still long enough. So the first question that we've asked the focus group participants to think of is, what do we think we know about current graduates in the state of Utah? And I want each of you to think about that for a few moments, and then we'll have you enter as responses or add comments under this question number 1. Again, you'll see on the Padlet 4 questions. We're going to go in order, and we'll just focus on question number 1 now. And I'll give you a couple of examples of things that I've heard, maybe Patty can too, in these other sessions to kind of get you thinking, since you don't have the advantage of working with groups of people as you go through this process. So one of the things I heard was Utah graduates know how to test, indicating that there's been a significant amount of assessment involved in their delivery system.
I've heard what they know about current Utah graduates is they're hardworking and need a job.
Yeah, and then another one that I've heard that caught my attention was that they seek choice. They expect choice. Mm-hmm. And that's certainly different than when I was a graduate back in the 1980s, where we were it's much more compliant and didn't expect very much choice. Okay, so I'm going to try to, hopefully I don't break anything through this process. So now if you've successfully been able to log into the Padlet, and you can see the URL up on the screen if you can't see it down in the text box. You'll just copy and paste that into your own URL, and then go under question 1 and add comment, and that's where we'll have you collect, or that's where we'll collect your comments to that question. What do you think? What do we think we know about current Utah graduates? And I'll set a timer for let's go with 2 minutes. And we may cut that short depending on, again, the input that we're getting.
And that's a point of clarification. It's just simple words or statements, and you can make your list as long as you'd like a grocery list. And then when the time is up, we'll have you press submit, and then all of yours will show up on our screen. But we're not going to have you press submit after every single one. Instead, we're going to time you, and you'll make your list of all of those character traits, qualities, whatever it is that you decide on. And then after that 1.5 minutes, then we're going to have you press submit, and it will populate the screen for all the other users to be able to see. If you have questions along the way, just hit your mic and go ahead and ask the question, or ask the question in the chat, because I'll be following along in the chat as well.
Okay, great, thank you. So 2 minutes of time for you to think about question number 1. What do we think we know about current graduates? and add those responses as a comment. Go ahead and begin.
Control C.
Okay,
And
we've
here's the link.
received the link for this Padlet. Should be
The chat box.
being sent back out in the chat box. You can copy and paste that into a browser, and it shouldn't require a password. Once you get that link, you should be able to enter this. And again, we're focusing right now on question number 1. So we'd like all the participants that are with us online. We've had a few more join us since we started to get to the Padlet. Consider question number 1. What do we think we know about current Utah graduates? And then under add comment, go ahead and start creating a list of what those things are. We've had the timer going, and we'll end this when that timer goes off. Okay, so we've had 2 minutes of time on this. Those of you who feel like you've completed your responses to question number 1, what do we think we know about current Utah graduates? You go ahead and hit, is it submit or enter?
Enter.
Enter.
Or submit, yeah.
And those should display. Let me refresh my screen. I've probably,
And then or click outside the box.
yeah, okay. So we've received some comments. We're gonna take a little bit longer on question 1 again because we had some participants join us just a little bit late, and also because it's our first question. There still might be some of you struggling with getting access to the Padlet. So I'm going to wait just a few more minutes, or another moment or two, before we move to question number 2. Anxious and unprepared. That's another one that I've heard. Well, there's really 2 things listed in there, and while they're not unrelated, there have been people who've commented on how anxious or how much anxiety some of our Utah graduates have, and a lack of confidence maybe, and then being unprepared in the context of college readiness, or even career readiness. Some people have indicated that before as well. Hardworking, certainly have large groups of our graduates who have that ability and capacity. Range of experiences based on where they went to school, that's certainly true. Each school has some unique opportunities within their schools.
On your own Padlet, if you're not seeing the updated version that you can see from Darren's screen, if you push refresh, then it keeps refreshing with the additional comments.
Okay, so we're going to move on to question number 2. In this, you'll notice these questions are all worded a little bit differently, and they're designed intentionally this way to get us to look at what are the characteristics and attributes that we value through a different lens. So question number 2 is, someone new is joining your family. What qualities and characteristics do you hope they bring? So again, we'll set the timer for 2 minutes. if you would go into that under add comment on question number 2 and think that through and begin entering your thoughts and ideas in that area. Okay, our 2 minutes are up on this question. This actually is my favorite question of the 4. It really, again, caused me to look at things in a different lens than I had before, especially in the context of what we're trying to build in our young people. Just the light going out on us again. I like to joke here that means we've been in our meeting too long. Because the light goes out. Kindness, ability to get along with others, intelligent. There's a bunch of things built into that one. It's been interesting to me to how often kindness comes up. Compassion, thoughtful, some of those attributes that are similar. Empathy that's listed there. Independence, ability to work with others. And those are attributes that don't always come up when we start looking at it through other lenses, especially if we were to say, what courses do we need to make sure we offer that build the skills and competencies that we want our students to have? But we oftentimes don't think about those things in the terms of course offerings. Okay, great. Thank you for those of you who've been able to take on the time and energy to add comments there.
And as an update on where we're going to be with this, when we're done with all 4 of these areas, then we're going to take time to actually have you guys talking to each other and communicating with voice or via the chat so that we can have more communication about what all of these lists mean and going from there. So there'll be time for us to be actually talking.
Yeah, and I can see someone went back to question 1. There's nothing wrong with that. These questions aren't locked down, and so I appreciate you. When you have thoughts, you can certainly go back to one of the other questions. We'll go on to question number 3 now, though. When a Utah employer is hiring, some of you who are participating might function in the role of an employer or have the opportunity to interview and hire people. So it might be easier for some than others to answer this question. But when a Utah employer is hiring, what do we think they look for in an ideal employee? Again, we'll go for 2 minutes. Go ahead and begin. Okay, our 2 minutes are up on this question. Let me refresh my screen and we'll see what we've got. If you're working on that, go ahead and submit or click outside that box. And let's just look at these together. And again, if anyone has comments that they would like to add, either through the text box or by unmuting your mic and sharing those, feel free to do so. Just scan down through here. Communication, I see on the first two lists right at the top. I would say that, and I see it down further in there as well. Both written and verbal communication has come up in every group that I've participated in. We seem to be trending towards making sure that our graduates have communication skills that allow them to be effective.
Darren, I'm wondering, I'm looking at the first response, and not everyone in this focus group comes from the same background, which is what we really appreciate. So can we have the person that talked about number one when it says the 6 C's and the 4 C's? I think I know what you're talking about, but can you tell the greater audience what those mean for the collaborate and communicate skills creatively? Basically the 6 C's and the 4 C's. Can we have that person give a little bit more information on what that is to you? And just unmute your mic. That's okay. We're going to go ahead, but if you can get your mic on and want to respond at a different time, that'll be great as well. So Darren, do you want to keep going with that?
Yeah, we'll go on. And if you don't have a mic on your device, the other way to give some clarity there would be either to add another comment to that string, or you could enter something through the chat box. But I do think that would be helpful for us as, again, we try to synthesize things down and look for patterns across the state and across stakeholder groups. It'd be helpful for us to get some clarity there to make sure we're clear on what you mean. We'll go to question 4. It's our last question, but not the last thing I'm going to ask from each of you. The question is, how would you measure success when your own child graduates from high school? I have a senior in high school this year, my third child, a daughter, who actually turns 18 today. So when I get home tonight, we'll get to have birthday dinner. But so I have some clear ideas of how I determine whether my children have been successfully educated. But we'd like to hear from each of you in this box. Again, you'll go to add comment. We'll give you 2 minutes. And you're looking at this through the lens of a parent or grandparent and how you measure success for them.
Or even if you haven't been a parent, just a child that you would know.
Yeah.
Hi, Tracy. Welcome to the discussion. If you can see on the chat, We're actually on a Padlet right now, and people are thinking on their own to populate the Padlet with their ideas. And if you click on the link that's above in the chat, you'll be able to see the Padlet, and it's also going to be reflected on the screen that Darren's sharing with you right now.
Hey, thank you.
Yeah.
So our fifth question, what do you believe is the most important characteristic of a Utah graduate? All right. Okay, our time is up on the fourth question. So let me refresh my screen. And let's take a look. And again, I'd encourage any of you who'd like to talk about what you're seeing there. Again, it's difficult with technology in terms of we're spread out, so we're together, but we're isolated.
Yes.
So it's harder to communicate verbally in some ways, but I encourage you to use the technology, and if you have thoughts about what you're seeing there, or questions from other participants post, feel free to express those while we look at these.
Yeah.
I had some parents the other day, and one of them said their ability to pay for their own cell phone. And it was kind of being lighthearted with that response, but it pointed to what I've seen in a lot, and that is the ability to be self-reliant. Oh, our lights are out again. Thank you, Patty. This ability for a 18 or 19-year-old to be self-reliant, both financially and in other ways, was what that parent was alluding to when she said the ability for them to pay for their own cell phone. Does anyone have comments or questions about what we're seeing there?
And if I can go back to the names, I think we have Tracy, Athena, William, and then there was a couple other users. So if you would like to comment, feel free on some of the things that you're looking, trends that you're seeing across the board that you think we really need to pay attention to.
And then we're also seeking some clarity from the post on question number 3, the post at the top there about the 6 C's and the 4 C's. If that participant would like to add clarification to that.
I wasn't sure if the microphone was going to go on, but I wanted to point out one thing.
William, can you turn your mic up just a little bit?
Oh, I will try. Is that better?
No,
just a little. We'll just have to listen really carefully.
Okay, yes.
Let me type it out.
Okay. And while William is typing it out, does anyone else have something to add? And maybe I can reflect on just a little bit. We had a user group that was our youth in custody, so it was students still in the education system. And this is just something that was talked about today. They answered these questions, and they answered them in a way that was different than any other user group. And we have to keep in mind that our youth in care are in the foster system, and some of the youth were saying, when they were answering some of these questions, like on number 1, what do we think we know about current Utah graduates? Their responses were more along the line of they're afraid, they're lost, they don't know what comes next. And then we also had a user group up at Weber State University, or a participant group up at Weber State University. It was our first year incoming freshmen. And when we asked them the same set of questions, they wanted us to know that they were hardworking, that they have jobs, that they have goals but maybe aren't sure how to achieve them. And so it's been very interesting with each user group or each participant group for them to be able to give us a different perspective on what's needed. And so overall, we've come up with some really good themes according to group. And so from this group, we'd really love to hear what you think is the most important thing. Like, what is the thing that we need to take back and say, this accurately represents what our students should know, be able to do, the attitudes, perceptions. What is it that we need to change? What is it that we need to keep? What is it that really would reflect this new path for our Utah graduates? So William, it looks like I'm going to read yours. An interesting thing to note in the answers there, we see two veins of what K-12 education is meant to accomplish. In one sense, we expect students to be ready for jobs, but on the other hand, we expect them to be ready for college. And yet most jobs aren't going to accept recent high school graduates. Thank you. Thank you. I just went down to South Carolina to look at their workforce initiative down there, and they have some very interesting things that might inform this conversation. What they've done with their Portrait of a Utah Graduate is they've recreated their tech schools, and they've recreated what happens in high schools. They created their Portrait of a Utah Graduate, and then they worked with internships, and so each student needs an internship. They need to have been able to work and have employability skills, and then be able to get on in a company and then have pathways to learning even more. And so that's what came from their South Carolina Portrait of a Graduate. So what are those types of things that we want to imitate or implement, create new here in the state of Utah? So great, thank you, William. Anything else? Anyone else?
All right, this is Tracy. I don't know, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I'm struggling to get used to this new program. I actually have 5 children. My oldest is 19. She's a sophomore at Southern Utah University, and my youngest is in 4th grade. So I kind of see the whole gamut from those who are just beginning to those who are just, starting into higher education. I was kind of shocked when my daughter went to college last year and taking her down there at kind of what you have said of those who aren't able to take care of themselves and be responsible and do those things that they're supposed to do. Just a silly story, but she had a roommate who they went shopping together, and the roommate said, "Man, I would just love some chocolate milk. How much can that cost anyway? It can't be that expensive." What, like $15?
What? Yeah.
So there's a missing there of those kind of life skills. We teach that highly in the special education side, but there's kind of a missing of that life skills maybe in some people who are living in, with parents who are doing everything.
Yeah, that was also with our freshmen at Weber State that we had talked to. They were saying they want more help about practical things because now they're out on their own. And how much does, soap cost? How much, how do they find out? What are those connections that they need to make that they used to be able to rely on parents to do for them at home? Even there was a group at a table, even as simple as laundry. They're like, these are things that we didn't have to do before.
Yeah.
And I'm sure really they would all die if they had to take a class on that, but it's something they really need to know.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Okay, well let's move into our. We've had the 4 questions. Now this is the more difficult part traditionally in the groups we've been working with, and that is we're going to ask you to consider what's been posted on Padlet. And also other thoughts that might have come from the responses you've read, some of the discussion that we've had. I want you to identify the most important characteristic of a graduate for you. What will be helpful for us is if this is a single element. So when we get done, we're going to have well over 1,000 individual responses from people who have identified what they believe to be the most important characteristic of a graduate. We have to synthesize that, and so we're probably going to try to put those all into a Wordle, some kind of a software application that allows us to see which attributes we received the most responses from. So on this one, rather than a sentence or a paragraph, it'd be helpful if you would get it down to whatever it is that you believe is the most important attribute for a Utah graduate to possess when they leave our system. And we'll give you a moment or two. This one's not timed, but we hope to get something from everyone who's participating today online before we wrap things up. So go ahead and take a few moments, just think about this. Some people really struggle and it takes them quite a while to get to one, because there's so many things that we want our graduates to possess. But go ahead and give us what you think the most important is.
And Whitney Child, thanks for putting in the 6 C's for us. Appreciate that.
Okay, oh, lights out again for us. Thank you for taking your time to identify what you believe is the most important attribute. Those are things that I've seen from other stakeholder groups. And again, your input gets added to those as the employees for the state board prepares recommendation to take to the State Board of Education to finalize that. So our timeline on this work, we have more sessions. I know the HOSA group, high school students at Leadership CTSO, they're meeting next week, and there'll be those students, the state leadership, they'll be involved in this process, and there's some others that go on into next week. After that, we'll start to synthesize this work, and I think the overall objective, and Patty, you can correct me if I'm wrong, was to, by the time we get to the spring, have kind of a formal picture of what a portrait of the Utah graduate would look like. Those of us who've been given those assignments by the state board to take back to the board to help inform their work. Does that feel right to you?
Mm-hmm. And Tracy, I just added your comment to Padlet. If there's anything else you wanted me to add that you weren't able to, let me know and I can add it to the other threads.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Are there questions from any of you who are with us today before we wrap things up?
One final thing is if you put in your email on this, or we can give you a place if you don't want it in a public setting, if you could send your email and you can to Darren, then we have a group we're creating a listserv of everyone who's participated so that we can give you updates and feedback. So Darren, I don't know if you want to put your email somewhere on here
yeah.
for them to...
Let me stop sharing my screen and get back to where I can enter that into the chat box. Okay, so you can you save that email address, put that, send me an email. With just all you have to do is put in the subject line, Portrait of a Graduate or POG, and then I'll make sure your email is added to that listserv, and so you can receive future communications or updates about the progress of the work on this task.
Right, and so I thank you again. You can continue to share with this Padlet and update it. You can also share it with others. That would be a good idea. If they want to respond to these questions, you could just give them that link and we can then go back in and we'll be tracking this for some time. So really appreciate it. Anything else? We've got Whitney, William, Tracy, Athena. Anyone else that would like to respond? I think Athena, I think we haven't heard from you, but that's okay. I'm not sure if your mic's working or not. I think it did in the beginning, right? Okay.
Sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
I keep forgetting to unmute it. So, but yes, it's working.
Okay. Anything else you'd like to say?
No, I don't think so. I think one of the things I always think about is when we think about all of these skills that we want Utah graduates to have, is that how do we help schools and help teachers get to the point where they can mentor students or teach students those skills.
Mm-hmm. That's the important piece is once we have the end in mind and we know what the goal is, the target is, then we say, how do we make that happen? Absolutely. And what supports do we need to provide and what legislative actions and what rules, policies, fiscal requests, all of that thing will come into play. So thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for your time and your thoughts.
Yeah. Have a good evening.